At 6:45 in the morning, my debit card was declined over a simple $7 slice of red velvet cake. When I called my husband to ask what was going on, he put me on speakerphone just so his teenage son could hear him laugh. "Your allowance is tapped out," he mocked me over the car Bluetooth. "If you want to spend another dollar of my money, you need to learn how to ask for permission first." I did not argue with him. I did not shed a single tear. I simply walked out of that upscale bakery, got into my car, and drove straight to my lawyer. 2 hours later, my phone lit up with 47 missed calls. My name is Maya. I am 34 years old, and I have spent the last 5 years letting my husband and his family believe I was nothing more than a low-level freelance bookkeeper who relied on his charity to survive. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to quietly dismantle a toxic person who underestimated your intelligence. The morning it all unraveled started like any other Tuesday in Buckhead. Atlanta traffic was already building, and the air inside the bakery was thick with humidity and the smell of expensive artisan coffee. I was standing near the register wearing my usual plain jeans and an oversized neutral sweater. I was only there because my 17-year-old stepson Trey had thrown a massive tantrum the night before about wanting a very specific, overly priced red velvet pastry for his breakfast. Trey was a high school senior at one of the most prestigious private academies in Atlanta, and his father Darius had spoiled him into a state of absolute unchecked entitlement. I handed the cashier my debit card, the one tied to the joint account Darius managed. The cashier swiped it. The machine beeped a harsh, angry sound. Denied. She frowned, wiped the magnetic strip, and tried it again. Denied. A line of wealthy commuters in tailored suits and designer dresses was forming behind me, shifting impatiently. The cashier gave me a look of polite pity, mixed with deep annoyance. I stepped aside, feeling the burn of their stares, and pulled out my phone. I dialed Darius. I was currently driving Trey to school in the Mercedes G-Wagon. He answered on the second ring, and I instantly heard the unmistakable hollow echo of his car cabin. He had me on speakerphone. "Darius," I said, keeping my voice incredibly low so the people around me would not hear the conversation. "My card just declined at the bakery. Did you transfer funds to a different account this morning?" A booming, arrogant laugh erupted from the phone. Darius thought this was hilarious. Trey snickered loudly in the passenger seat. "Your allowance is tapped out," Maya Darius said, his voice dripping with intense condescension. "You have been spending way too much on groceries and household junk lately." I moved the money to my personal checking account. I stood frozen near the espresso machine, gripping my phone tightly. "Darius, I am standing at the register right now. Trey wanted this red velvet cake for his breakfast. It is only $7. Just transfer $20 over so I can pay and leave without causing a scene." "Absolutely not," Darius replied, his tone hardening into a harsh command. "You need to learn how to budget better. If you want to spend another single dollar of my money, you need to learn how to ask for permission first." Trey chimed in, his voice dripping with teenage disrespect. "Yeah, Maya. Dad works extremely hard for his money. Stop trying to drain him dry just because you barely make minimum wage punching numbers." Darius chuckled again, clearly proud of his son for insulting me so blatantly. "Walk home," Maya Darius ordered. "Think about your financial irresponsibility on the way." He hung up. The line went completely dead. I looked at the cashier. She was staring at the ceiling, pretending not to have heard the entire humiliating exchange. I smiled politely, told her to cancel the order, and walked out of the heavy glass doors. I did not feel humiliated anymore. I felt cold, calculating, and completely awake. I walked to the parking lot and got into my 2015 Toyota Hybrid. It was a modest, reliable car that Dominique, my highly critical sister-in-law, loved to mock at family dinners. They all thought I drove it because I was completely broke. They thought Darius provided the expensive roof over my head. They had absolutely no idea who I really was. I did not drive back to the sprawling suburban mansion we shared. I merged onto the highway and drove directly downtown to a sleek glass high-rise building. I pulled into the private underground parking garage, took the secure executive elevator to the 40th floor, and walked through the solid mahogany double doors of Elias and Associates. Elias was a former corporate prosecutor who now specialized in ruthless asset protection and wealth management. He was also my personal attorney. His receptionist handed me a black coffee the moment I walked in. I bypassed the luxury waiting area and stepped right into his massive corner office. Elias looked up from his dual monitors, noting my intense expression. He took off his wire-rimmed glasses and folded his hands. "Maya," he said smoothly, "it is not even 8 in the morning. Who are we destroying today?" "Darius," I replied, sitting in the plush leather chair directly across from his massive desk. He just humiliated me over a $7 cake and told me I needed permission to spend his money. Elias leaned back, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Darius told you that you need permission to spend his money. Does Darius know he does not actually have any money?" "No," I said, taking a slow sip of my hot coffee. And it is finally time we correct his reality. To fully understand the massive magnitude of Darius's delusion, you have to understand the foundational dynamic of our marriage. When I met Darius 5 years ago, he was a regional manager for a mid-tier insurance firm. He made decent money, but he spent it much faster than he earned it. He was entirely obsessed with the Atlanta high society lifestyle. He bought expensive designer clothes, purchased flashy luxury watches on credit, and fronted massive bills at luxury steakhouses just to impress people who did not genuinely care about him. I intentionally presented myself as a simple, quiet woman who did freelance bookkeeping for small local businesses. I never cared about flashy labels or social climbing. I preferred quiet, unshakable stability. Darius loved that dynamic because it made him feel utterly superior. He loved playing the role of the big wealthy provider rescuing the poor plain unassuming woman. What Darius did not know, and what I had kept fiercely hidden under layers of ironclad non-disclosure agreements and corporate shielding, was that my freelance bookkeeping gig was a complete cover. I am the sole founder and chief executive officer of a highly lucrative intellectual property and commercial real estate holding fund. I manage intellectual property rights for major tech developers and own premium commercial real estate properties across the state of Georgia. I am worth millions of dollars. When we got married, Darius insisted on handling the joint account for household expenses. He gave me a monthly allowance card, essentially treating me like a dependent child. I let him do it. It was a social experiment for me, a way to test his character and watch his behavior. But behind the scenes, I was the one quietly funding his entire fake luxury lifestyle. The massive luxury 6-bedroom mansion we lived in. It was owned entirely by one of my limited liability companies. The Mercedes G-Wagon. Darius drove around town pretending he bought it with a huge executive bonus, leased directly under my corporate account. The $25,000 per semester tuition for Trey to attend his elite private school. Auto-drafted from a confidential trust fund I secretly set up to ensure the boy got a solid education despite his father's reckless financial spending habits. Even the prestigious black credit card Darius flashed at expensive downtown dinners was a corporate card tied to my primary holding company. He was merely listed as an authorized user. Darius truly thought he was the unquestioned king of the castle. He did not realize I owned the castle, the land it was built on, and the very crown resting on his head. I set my coffee mug down firmly on Elias's desk. "The joke has run its course," I told him. "He wants me to understand the value of a dollar today. I want to show him exactly what happens when all my dollars suddenly disappear." Elias opened a secure portal on his computer, his fingers flying rapidly across the mechanical keyboard. "Give me the exact parameters, Maya. How deep are we cutting this morning?" "Freeze it all," I commanded, my voice completely devoid of any emotion or hesitation. "Cancel his authorized user status on the corporate black card immediately. Go into the trust portal and revoke the tuition autopay for Trey's private school. Pull the funding for the G-Wagon lease right now. Cut the power to his fake throne." Elias nodded, clicking swiftly through the complex banking dashboards. "The black card is officially suspended and deactivated. The school tuition portal is updated. The next major payment scheduled for tomorrow morning will definitely bounce. I am notifying the luxury dealership that the corporate lease on the Mercedes is being transferred back, and they should expect to reclaim the vehicle immediately if the primary driver cannot provide alternative proof of independent funding. I watched the green confirmation check marks pop up sequentially on Elias's bright monitor screen. For 5 long years I had played the submissive, grateful, and quiet wife. I had smiled politely while his sister Dominique mocked my simple clothes. I had kept quiet while Trey constantly disrespected me in my own home. I had swallowed my pride while Darius paraded around Atlanta playing the role of a wealthy mogul entirely on my dime. I had done it all because I wanted to believe he truly loved me, not my money. I had desperately wanted a real loving family. But this morning, listening to him laugh cruelly with his son, while I stood deeply humiliated at a bakery register, the illusion shattered completely and permanently. Darius did not love me. He loved having a convenient punching bag. He loved having someone beneath him to falsely elevate his own fragile ego. "Are we initiating divorce proceedings today?" Elias asked, pulling up a fresh new set of legal documents. "Not yet," I replied smoothly. "If I serve him divorce papers right now, he will just play the victim card. He will spin a fake narrative that I am a crazy woman walking out on a perfectly good marriage. I want him to feel the absolute financial collapse first. I want him to run out into his precious high society world and realize he has absolutely nothing left to stand on. I want his blinding arrogance to be the exact thing that destroys him completely." Elias chuckled a dark, highly professional sound. "You are the boss, Maya. The accounts are completely locked down. He is officially flying without a safety net now. Let the games begin." I thanked Elias and walked confidently out of his corner office. I took the executive elevator down to the parking garage, got back into my modest Toyota hybrid, and drove toward a nearby quiet park. I parked under the deep shade of a large oak tree, reclined my driver's seat, and turned off my cellular phone. For the first time in 5 years, I felt completely at peace with myself. I closed my eyes and took a long, deep breath, letting the cool morning air wash over me. Exactly 2 hours later, I reached over and powered my phone back on. The screen immediately up, vibrating aggressively in my hand. Notifications flooded the lock screen in rapid, unending succession. Missed calls, urgent, angry voicemails, and a massive barrage of frantic text messages filled my display. I looked at the notification counter located at the top of the brilliant screen. 47 missed calls from Darius. The very first heavy domino had finally fallen, and the resulting crash was going to be absolutely spectacular to witness today. The park offered a brief sanctuary, the rustle of oak leaves overhead, providing a stark contrast to the absolute digital warfare exploding on my phone. 47 missed calls from Darius. He was spiraling. I could practically smell his desperation through the glass screen of my device. For a man who obsessed over the flawless perception of his elite status, a declined transaction was akin to a fatal injury. I took a deep breath, tracing the steering wheel of my modest Toyota, and pressed the callback button. It rang exactly half a time before he answered. "Maya," he roared, his voice a frantic mixture of outrage and absolute panic. His usual smooth, curated baritone was entirely gone, replaced by a strained, breathless wheeze. "What is wrong with your bank?" "I am standing at the Porsche dealership in Sandy Springs right now. I am supposed to be signing the lease on the Macan for Dominique's birthday, and your stupid corporate card was just flagged as stolen." I could hear the distinct ambient noise of a luxury car showroom in the background, the soft jazz playing over the speakers, the murmur of expensive sales associates, and the sharp, echoing hum of polished tile floors. Darius was not in a private office. He was standing right on the showroom floor, exposing his financial failure to the very people he so desperately wanted to impress. "Did you call the bank?" I asked smoothly, leaning back in my driver's seat. My voice was steady, offering him no emotional foothold. "Of course I called the bank!" he shouted, completely abandoning his sophisticated persona. "The representative told me I am no longer an authorized user. They refuse to give me any information. The finance manager here is looking at me like I am some kind of street hustler trying to run a scam. They even called over the general manager. Fix this, Maya." Fix your massive accounting error right now before I lose my mind. I was gasping for air. The sheer indignity of being treated like a common fraudster while trying to secure a $100,000 sports car for his equally arrogant sister was breaking him. Dominique, the self-proclaimed girl boss of Atlanta, was likely expecting that car to be delivered to her luxury salon by noon. I checked my fingernails, entirely unbothered by his meltdown. "It is not an accounting error, Darius," I said quietly. My tone was icy, deliberate, and final. "What are you talking about?" he snapped. His voice was beginning to tremble with genuine fear. "The dealership staff must have been closing in on him. Call them and authorize the transaction. Dominique's birthday party is tonight. I already told everyone I was getting her the car." "That is a corporate card, Darius," I replied, enunciating each word with crystal clear precision. "It is tied to my primary holding company. You are no longer an authorized user. You no longer have access to my corporate funds. If you want to lease a luxury vehicle, I suggest you use your own money." "Are you insane?" he hissed, trying to lower his voice but failing miserably. "I do not have that kind of liquid cash right now. My bonus does not clear until next quarter. Stop playing these psychotic games." Maya authorized the card. "If you want to spend another dollar of my money," I said, throwing his exact words from the bakery right back at him, "you need to learn how to ask for permission first." I did not wait for his response. I ended the call. I watched the screen go dark and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The silence in my small hybrid car was profoundly satisfying. I started the engine and merged back onto the busy Atlanta streets. I needed to head back to the massive suburban mansion I owned. It was time to pack a bag. The initial shockwave had been delivered, but the real storm was just beginning to gather strength. My phone buzzed again as I navigated through the heavy late-morning traffic. A text message from Darius flashed across the digital display. "You are going to regret this. When I get home, I am going to put you in your exact place. You are nothing without me. I am calling Dominique. She will deal with your crazy behavior." I smiled, shaking my head at his sheer audacity. He truly believed he still held the upper hand. He actually believed his sister Dominique, a woman who openly mocked my inexpensive clothes while running a high-end hair salon and spa, had the power to intimidate me. What Darius and Dominique both fundamentally failed to understand was that they were playing checkers while I owned the entire board. I pulled through the wrought iron gates of our gated community and parked in the expansive circular driveway. The massive 6-bedroom brick mansion loomed over the manicured lawn. I walked through the heavy mahogany front doors, stepping into the grand foyer with its sweeping double staircase and imported marble floors. I did not pause to admire the wealth. I walked straight up to the master suite and pulled a single sturdy duffel bag from the back of my closet. I packed only my absolute essentials: my laptop, secure physical drives, necessary corporate documents, and a few weeks' worth of casual clothing. I did not touch the expensive jewelry Darius had supposedly bought me, because I knew he had purchased it using my own corporate funds anyway. I moved methodically, leaving the closet perfectly intact, save for the few items I actually valued. I was zipping the duffel bag closed when I heard the unmistakable sound of the front door violently slamming open. Heavy, aggressive footsteps echoed up the grand staircase. Darius was home, and he had brought reinforcements. "Maya!" Darius bellowed, his voice echoing through the massive house. I slung the duffel bag over my shoulder and walked calmly out of the master suite. I met them at the top of the landing. Darius looked absolutely unhinged. His designer suit jacket was rumpled, his tie was loosened, and he was sweating profusely. Standing slightly behind him was Trey, holding his expensive leather backpack and looking furiously confused. And leading the charge, standing shoulder to shoulder with Darius, was Dominique. Dominique was dressed head to toe in flashy designer labels, her hair styled to absolute perfection. She glared at me, her eyes narrowed with pure, unadulterated contempt. "What exactly is wrong with you?" Dominique demanded, stepping forward and pointing a manicured finger in my direction. "You purposefully embarrassed my brother at the Porsche dealership over a car he was getting for my birthday. You broke, pathetic woman. You should be on your knees thanking God that a man like Darius even looked in your direction." I stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at the three of them. I did not raise my voice. I did not engage in their desperate, chaotic energy. You look very successful today, Dominique. I observed, mildly noting the heavy gold watch on her wrist. The salon business must be booming. Dominique scoffed, tossing her hair over her shoulder. She took my calm demeanor as a sign of weakness. Of course, my business is booming. I am expanding the spa to the second floor next month. I am a real entrepreneur, Maya. Not some fake little bookkeeper pushing pennies around from home. I actually build things. And because you decided to throw a crazy little temper tantrum today, I am going to make sure Darius cuts off your tiny little allowance permanently. You are going to be out on the streets. Darius puffed out his chest, emboldened by his sister's aggressive support. You hear that? He sneered, pointing at my duffel bag. Where do you think you are going with that cheap bag? You have absolutely nothing without me. Put the bag down, fix the bank accounts, and maybe I will not kick you out of my house tonight. Trey rolled his eyes, leaning against the hallway wall. Just kick her out now, Dad. She is useless anyway. She forgot to pay my school tuition. The headmaster pulled me out of class today because the check bounced. I was humiliated in front of everyone. I looked at Trey, then at Darius, and finally at Dominique. They were entirely convinced they had cornered me. They believed their combined arrogance was enough to break my spirit and force me back into submission. I gripped the strap of my duffel bag and slowly walked down the marble stairs. They parted slightly, allowing me to pass through them. I did not stop walking until I reached the heavy front door. Your house, I asked softly, pausing with my hand on the brass door handle. I turned to look at Darius. You should really check the property deed, Darius. You might be surprised to find out who actually owns the ground you are standing on. Before he could process the statement, I looked directly at his sister. Congratulations on the planned expansion, Dominique. It is always a shame when small businesses face unexpected overhead costs. I opened the door, stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight, and pulled the door firmly shut behind me, cutting off Darius's confused, angry shouting. I walked to my Toyota, tossed the duffel bag into the passenger seat, and climbed behind the steering wheel. I pulled out my phone and opened my secure messaging application. I found Elias's contact thread. Execute the default clause on the downtown commercial property immediately. I typed, my thumbs moving swiftly across the digital keyboard. Terminate the subsidized lease agreement. Elias responded less than 30 seconds later. Consider it done. The property manager is serving the notice to her salon as we speak. Rent is now market rate, retroactively applied for the breach of covenant. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the sprawling mansion. Dominique believed she was a self-made mogul. She believed she had built her luxury salon empire entirely through her own hustle and brilliance. What she did not know was that the massive high-end commercial building her salon occupied was owned by my real estate holding firm. 3 years ago, when she was facing bankruptcy, Darius had secretly begged me for help. I had instructed my property management company to offer her a deeply subsidized, heavily discounted lease under an anonymous benefactor program just to keep her business afloat and protect Darius from having to bail her out personally. I had essentially been paying her rent for 3 years. I had been funding her delusional girl boss persona. But the specific covenant in that commercial lease clearly stated that the anonymous subsidy could be revoked instantly, without warning, at the complete discretion of the property owner. By insulting me in my own home, Dominique had just guaranteed her own financial ruin. As I merged onto the highway, heading toward my private downtown penthouse, a cold smile finally broke across my face. They thought I was running away. They thought I was a terrified broke woman fleeing from their collective power. They had no idea I was just repositioning myself to watch their entire fake empire burn to the ground. The heavy mahogany double doors of the master bedroom flew open with such violent force that the brass handles struck the drywall. Darius stood in the doorway, chest heaving, his expensive tailored suit jacket completely unbuttoned and wrinkled from his earlier panic at the dealership. He was not alone. Flanking him like loyal foot soldiers were his 17-year-old son Trey and his older sister Dominique. Dominique was the undisputed ringleader of the group right now, wearing a vibrant, custom-tailored pantsuit, her hair laid to absolute perfection, and a massive diamond watch gleaming on her wrist. She exuded the aggressive confidence of a woman who firmly believed she was the reigning queen of Atlanta high society. What in the world is wrong with you? Darius barked, stepping into the room. His eyes darted from my calm face down to the simple canvas duffel bag resting at my feet. Fix the bank accounts right now, Maya, or I swear I am packing your cheap clothes myself and throwing you out onto the street. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply stood at the edge of the plush king-sized bed and watched the three of them project their fragile egos onto me. For 5 years I had tolerated their collective disrespect. They had no idea that the very floor they were standing on was legally owned by my holding company. Before I could even formulate a response, Dominique pushed past her brother and stepped directly into my personal space. She looked me up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Look at you," Dominique sneered, crossing her arms over her chest. "You are an absolute embarrassment to my brother. He works tirelessly to maintain a certain standard of living, to build a legacy in this city, and you cannot even manage the basic household accounting. You are a low-level freelance bookkeeper, Maya." She gestured dismissively toward my duffel bag. "Where exactly do you think you are going with that pathetic little bag?" Dominique asked, her voice dripping with venom. "You have nowhere to go. You have no money, no connections, and no real career. By messing up his bank transfers on the day he is supposed to be celebrating my birthday, you are a bitter, jealous woman." I looked at Dominique, taking in her flashy designer handbag and the expensive silk blouse she wore. "You look very successful today, Dominique," I observed, mildly, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "Business at the salon must be booming." Dominique scoffed, throwing her head back and laughing a harsh, mocking sound. "Of course my business is booming. I am a real entrepreneur, Maya. I am a self-made woman. My luxury salon and spa downtown is pulling in high-profile clients from across the entire state. In fact, I just signed the paperwork this morning to expand my operations to the second floor of the building. I am investing $200,000 into new high-end renovations. That is what true Black excellence looks like. That is what real wealth building looks like. You would not know the first thing about it because you are too busy pushing pennies around on a computer from home." Trey leaned against the doorframe, checking his phone and shaking his head. "Just kick her out now, Dad," Trey complained, not even bothering to look up from his screen. "She is totally useless anyway. She forgot to pay my private school tuition. The headmaster actually pulled me out of my advanced placement economics class today because the check bounced. I had to walk past all my friends while the administration told me my account was delinquent. I was completely humiliated. I am not living in the same house as a woman who cannot even do her one simple job." Darius pointed a perfectly manicured finger at my chest. "You hear that, Maya? You embarrassed my son. You embarrassed me. You tried to ruin my sister's birthday celebration. You are a deeply ungrateful woman. I am giving you exactly 5 minutes to call the bank. Remove whatever fraudulent freeze you put on my accounts and restore my access. If you refuse to do that, you can take your cheap little bag and walk out of my house for good. Dominique will help me find a woman who actually understands how to act like a supportive partner to a powerful man." I maintained steady eye contact with Darius. I absorbed every single insult, every threat, and every ridiculous claim of power. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they could not see the trap closing around them. I reached down, grabbed the sturdy handles of my duffel bag, and slung it effortlessly over my shoulder. "I am not calling the bank, Darius," I said, my voice eerily calm and devoid of any emotional weight. "Because the bank will simply tell you the exact same thing I am telling you right now. You are no longer an authorized user on my corporate accounts." "You are delusional," Dominique snapped, stepping closer to me. "You do not have corporate accounts. You are a freelancer. Stop pretending you have any actual power here. Darius, just throw her out. I am tired of looking at her." I turned my attention back to Dominique. "Your salon expansion sounds incredibly ambitious, Dominique," I said smoothly. "It is always a tremendous risk to invest $200,000 into high-end renovations when you are operating out of a leased commercial space. Overhead costs can be quite unpredictable in downtown Atlanta. It would be a terrible shame if your landlord suddenly decided to change the terms of your agreement." Dominique glared at me, clearly confused by the specific nature of my comment, but too arrogant to reconsider her stance. "My landlord loves me," she shot back confidently. "I have a deeply subsidized, highly favorable lease agreement. The property management company considers me a premier anchor tenant. You have absolutely no idea how commercial real estate works, Maya. Just grab your cheap bag and get out of my brother's house. I did not argue. I simply nodded, stepping forward. Darius and Dominique instinctively parted, allowing me a clear path to the door. I walked past them, my footsteps completely silent on the thick carpet. I walked out of the master suite, moved gracefully across the upper landing, and began descending the grand sweeping staircase. Darius followed me to the top of the landing, shouting down at me as I descended. "If you walk out that front door, Maya, you are never coming back inside," he bellowed, his voice bouncing off the high vaulted ceilings of the foyer. "I am changing the security codes. I am cutting off your cell phone plan. You will be begging me to take you back by tomorrow morning." I reached the bottom of the stairs and paused for just a fraction of a second. I looked around the magnificent foyer, admiring the pristine marble floors and the breathtaking crystal chandelier hanging high above. I had purchased this massive estate through one of my anonymous limited liability companies entirely in cash. Darius honestly believed his name was on the mortgage, oblivious to the fact that he was essentially living in my property as an unauthorized squatter. I opened the heavy mahogany front door, letting the warm afternoon sunlight flood into the entryway. I did not look back at him. I simply pulled the heavy door shut, hearing the lock engage behind me with a firm, satisfying click. I walked down the expansive driveway and approached my modest hybrid vehicle. I tossed the duffel bag onto the passenger seat and climbed behind the steering wheel. I started the engine, shifting the car into gear, and slowly drove away from the sprawling suburban mansion. I watched the wrought iron gates open smoothly, allowing me to merge onto the quiet residential street. I quickly found the ongoing communication thread with my attorney, Elias. Dominique had spent the last 3 years parading around Atlanta as a self-made mogul, bragging about her massive salon success. What she fundamentally did not know was that the luxury commercial building her salon occupied was completely owned by my real estate holding firm. 3 years ago, when she was facing total bankruptcy, Darius had secretly begged me for help. I had instructed my property management company to offer her a deeply subsidized lease under a strict anonymous benefactor program just to keep her business afloat and protect Darius from having to bail her out personally. I had essentially been paying her rent for 3 years. I had been funding her delusional girl boss persona. But the specific covenant in that commercial lease clearly stated that the anonymous subsidy could be revoked instantly, without warning, at the complete discretion of the property owner. By insulting me in my own home, Dominique had just guaranteed her own brutal financial ruin. I tapped the screen and typed a quick, decisive message to Elias. "Execute the default clause on the downtown commercial property right now, Elias." The weekend passed in a state of absolute, uninterrupted tranquility. I had moved my personal belongings into a luxury penthouse suite located in the very heart of downtown Atlanta, a property owned entirely by my holding company. I spent Saturday and Sunday reviewing quarterly financial reports, completely ignoring the relentless barrage of frantic messages flooding my secondary mobile device. Darius and Dominique were spiraling into a deep panic, but their chaos could no longer reach me. I was preparing for the next precise strike. Monday morning arrived with brilliant sunshine and crisp autumn air. While I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corporate office sipping a freshly brewed espresso, a very different morning was unfolding across the city at the prestigious Oakbridge Private Academy. Trey sat in the front row of his advanced placement economics class. He wore a perfectly tailored school blazer, expensive designer sneakers, and a luxury watch his father had bought him, using my corporate funds. He slumped comfortably in his chair, projecting the intense arrogance of a boy who firmly believed his immense wealth made him completely untouchable. He was busy sending mocking text messages to his friends under the desk, completely ignoring the complex lecture happening at the front of the classroom. The heavy wooden door of the classroom swung open. The headmaster's personal assistant stepped inside, interrupting the lesson. She carried a stiff, formal expression on her face. She whispered something to the teacher, who immediately stopped speaking and turned his gaze directly toward the front row. Trey, the teacher, announced, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. The headmaster needs to see you in his office immediately. Gather your belongings. You will not be returning to class today. Trey scoffed, rolling his eyes as he slowly packed his designer backpack. He assumed this was a minor administrative issue, perhaps a scheduling conflict, or a mistake regarding his upcoming lacrosse tournament. He slung the heavy bag over his shoulder and sauntered out of the classroom, relishing the curious stares of his wealthy classmates. He walked down the polished mahogany hallways with total confidence, pushing open the frosted glass door to the main administrative suite. The headmaster, a stern man who tolerated absolutely no disrespect, was waiting for him. He did not offer Trey a seat. He simply stood behind his massive oak desk, holding a single sheet of red-stamped paper. Trey, the headmaster, began, his tone entirely devoid of its usual warmth. I am going to make this very brief. Your semester tuition payment of $25,000 was returned by the banking institution this morning. The check has completely bounced. Furthermore, your student account is now severely delinquent. Trey stared at the man, a cold wave of confusion washing over him. That is completely impossible, Trey argued, his arrogant facade cracking slightly. My dad is an incredibly successful regional director. We have plenty of money. There has to be a stupid banking error. Call my stepmother Maya. She is our bookkeeper. She handles all the boring financial transfers for my dad. The headmaster placed the red-stamped document firmly onto the desk. We have already attempted to process the payment 3 times. The financial institution informed us the funding source has been permanently revoked. Until the $25,000 balance is paid in full utilizing certified funds, you are officially suspended from Oakbridge Private Academy. You are prohibited from attending classes, participating in extracurricular activities, or remaining on school grounds. Security will escort you to the front gates immediately. The sheer humiliation hit Trey like a physical blow. The color completely drained from his face. He was being kicked out. He was being escorted off the premises like a common trespasser. The assistant guided him out of the office and down the main corridor, forcing him to walk past the large glass windows of the student lounge. He could see his friends pointing at him, whispering behind their hands. The elite society he clung to was already turning its back on him. The moment the heavy iron gates of the academy locked shut behind him, Trey pulled his smartphone from his pocket. His hands were shaking with pure, unadulterated rage. He bypassed his father's contact and dialed my number directly. I was sitting at my sleek conference table reviewing commercial lease agreements when my phone screen illuminated with his name. I let it ring 3 times before calmly pressing the green button. I brought the phone to my ear, waiting for the explosion. What is wrong with you? Trey screamed into the receiver, his voice echoing loudly. I just got pulled out of my economics class and humiliated in front of the entire school. The headmaster threw me out because my tuition check bounced. You had one simple job, Maya. You are supposed to be the bookkeeper. You forgot to transfer the money. You are completely useless. Fix this right now before I call my dad and tell him how badly you screwed up again. I listened to his high-pitched tantrum, feeling absolutely no sympathy for the boy who had spent 5 years treating me like the hired help. He had mocked my clothes, disrespected my presence in my own home, and proudly participated in his father's cruel financial jokes. I did not forget to transfer the money, Trey. I replied, my voice steady, professional, and chillingly calm. I canceled the transfer deliberately. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. You did what Trey demanded, his anger morphing rapidly into genuine panic. You cannot do that. That is my dad's money. You are just a broke freelancer. You have no right to touch our accounts. I am standing on the sidewalk outside my school like an idiot. Actually, Trey, I said smoothly, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the polished table, it was never your dad's money. I funded your entire private school education. I paid for the designer clothes you wear. I paid for the phone you are currently using to scream at me. Your dad does not have $25,000 to his name. If you want to return to your prestigious little academy, I strongly suggest you call your highly successful father and ask him to pay the bill himself. You are lying, Trey yelled, his voice breaking. My dad is rich. You are just a bitter, jealous woman trying to ruin my life because you have nothing. Call him, I challenged softly. Call your wealthy father and ask him to wire the funds today. Let me know how that works out for you. I moved my finger to the red button and ended the call. I instantly opened my contact settings and blocked his number permanently. The finality of the action was deeply satisfying. The spoiled prince had officially been dethroned, and the harsh reality of his actual financial status was going to hit him incredibly hard today. Meanwhile, across town, Darius was sitting in his modest insurance branch office, furiously trying to figure out a way to restore his suspended credit lines. His desk was littered with past due notices and aggressive letters from various creditors he had been ignoring for months. His personal checking account showed a balance of less than $300. He was desperately attempting to secure a high-interest payday loan when his office telephone rang. He snatched the receiver, barking an impatient greeting. "Mr. Darius," a stern voice said. "This is the Financial Administration Board at Oakbridge Private Academy. We are calling regarding your son, Trey." Darius stiffened, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Yes, what is the issue?" "Your tuition payment has been rejected due to insufficient funds and a revoked authorization mandate," the administrator stated coldly. "Trey has been removed from the campus. We require an immediate certified wire transfer of $25,000 by the close of business today, or his enrollment will be permanently terminated." Darius felt the room spin. The crushing weight of public humiliation pressed down on his chest. His son had been kicked out of school. His peers, the wealthy parents he constantly bragged to, would undoubtedly hear about this massive financial failure. He had spent years carefully crafting the illusion of being a highly successful corporate mogul, and Maya was systematically tearing it down piece by piece. "I will handle it." Darius choked out his voice, barely a whisper. "There has been a banking error. I will handle it immediately." He slammed the phone down, his hands trembling with a mixture of absolute terror and violent anger. He could not call his country club friends for a loan. He could not ask his sister Dominique because she was currently dealing with her own commercial lease disaster. He had absolutely no one to turn to and no safety net left to catch him. He pulled his car keys from his pocket, his breathing ragged and shallow. He was done playing games. He was going to confront Maya directly. He was going to march into her cheap little accounting firm, cause a massive scene in front of her colleagues, and physically force her to restore his access to the corporate funds. He believed he could still intimidate her if he cornered her in public. Darius sprinted out of his office, ignoring his confused reception staff, and threw himself into the driver's seat of his leased Mercedes G-Wagon. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, driving aggressively through the dense Atlanta traffic. He punched the address Maya had given him years ago into his navigation system. The address of the modest accounting firm she supposedly worked for. He was gripping the leather steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles turned completely white. He swerved through lanes, running a yellow light fueled entirely by desperate, blinding rage. He pulled up to the commercial address, slamming the heavy vehicle into park right in front of the building. He unbuckled his seatbelt, ready to unleash absolute hell. He was going to drag her out of her cubicle and demand his life back today. Darius slammed his heavy car door shut with enough force to shake the luxury vehicle. He marched across the concrete sidewalk and pushed aggressively through the revolving glass doors of the commercial building. His mind was solely focused on crushing my newfound rebellion. He checked the directory mounted on the lobby wall. Suite 400. That was the address I had provided on every tax document and emergency contact form for 5 years. He stepped into the elevator and pressed the glowing fourth-floor button. He forcefully straightened his silk tie while watching his angry reflection in the mirrored doors. He fully expected to find me sitting in a dreary cubicle surrounded by stacks of tedious paperwork. He planned to grab my arm, humiliate me in front of my coworkers, and force me to unlock his bank accounts right there on the spot. The elevator chimed pleasantly as the doors slid open to reveal the 4th floor. Darius stormed out entirely ready to unleash a vicious barrage of verbal abuse. He pushed open the frosted glass door clearly marked with the suite number. Instead of a bustling accounting firm filled with busy employees, he found himself standing in a tiny, sterile waiting room. A single receptionist sat behind a minimalist white desk, casually sorting through a pile of manila envelopes. There were no ringing telephones, no clicking keyboards, and absolutely no signs of a thriving corporate environment. Darius marched directly up to the desk, slamming his palm flat against the pristine surface. "I am looking for my wife." "My wife," he demanded, his voice thick with unbridled rage. "Her name is Maya. She has worked here as a freelance bookkeeper for 5 long years. Tell her Darius is here." The receptionist blinked up at him, her expression completely devoid of recognition. She politely set down a bundle of letters and shook her head. "Sir, there is no one named Maya who works in this office. I am the only employee on this floor today." Darius felt a hot flash of extreme irritation wash over his face. "Stop playing games with me," he snapped, leaning menacingly closer to the desk. "This is her registered corporate address. I know for an absolute fact she works in Suite 400. The young woman sighed, gesturing toward a large wall of metallic locked boxes located just behind her desk. "Sir, this is not an accounting firm. This is a virtual mail forwarding facility. Independent contractors rent out these physical suite numbers solely to receive their business mail. No one actually works in these offices except for the mail staff." Darius froze completely. The sheer magnitude of her simple explanation struck him like a physical blow to the chest. He stared blankly at the wall of metal mailboxes, his mind racing to process the terrifying reality unfolding before him. For 5 entire years, he had blindly accepted my story about being a low-level freelance bookkeeper. He had never once bothered to drop by my office for lunch or surprise me with flowers because he fundamentally did not care about my career. He had deemed my work too boring and entirely beneath his high society standards. Now, standing in this empty, sterile room, a horrifying realization crept down his spine. He had absolutely zero idea what his wife actually did for a living. He had no idea where I spent my days, who I worked with, or where my steady stream of income was genuinely originating from. He stumbled backward, the arrogant fire in his chest rapidly cooling into genuine panic. He turned around without saying another word and practically ran back to the elevator. His entire perception of our marriage was entirely fake. I was not the timid, predictable woman he thought he had completely under his thumb. I was an absolute stranger to him. While Darius was fleeing the virtual mailroom in a state of utter shock, I was sitting comfortably in my authentic corner office. My sprawling downtown penthouse suite offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire city skyline. The thick, soundproof glass shielded me from the chaotic noise of the busy streets far below. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water as my attorney Elias walked through the heavy wooden doors. He carried a red legal dossier tucked securely under his left arm. The trap was ready. Elias placed the red dossier directly onto my polished mahogany desk. He took a seat opposite me, a sharp, predatory smile playing on his lips. "The school successfully kicked the boy off the premises," Elias reported smoothly. "Your husband's corporate card is bouncing all over town, and his luxury vehicle lease has been officially terminated. He is currently bleeding out in public, Maya." I nodded, opening the heavy cover of the red dossier. It was finally time to activate the most devastating weapon in my entire arsenal. To truly understand the depth of Darius's upcoming ruin, one had to look back at the very beginning of our relationship. Before we got married, Darius was drowning in a highly toxic sea of massive debt. He had a terrible habit of gambling heavily at underground poker games and investing in fraudulent luxury schemes to impress his affluent friends. I desperately wanted to be perceived as a wealthy, successful businessman, but he was actually bleeding cash at an alarming rate. By the time he proposed to me, his secret debts had ballooned to exactly $150,000. He was mere weeks away from a catastrophic personal bankruptcy that would have completely destroyed his fragile reputation in the city. I could not allow his toxic financial history to negatively impact my immaculate credit score once our assets became legally intertwined through marriage. So I took immediate action. I utilized a discreet subsidiary debt purchasing agency that my primary holding company fully controlled. I anonymously purchased every single one of his outstanding debts for pennies on the dollar. I gathered all his messy liabilities into one single legally binding corporate portfolio. I essentially became his sole anonymous creditor without him ever realizing it. Darius honestly believed he had experienced a miraculous stroke of incredibly good luck. When the harassing phone calls from his previous creditors suddenly stopped, he assumed a clerical error had wiped his slate clean. He happily continued his arrogant, extravagant lifestyle, completely oblivious to the fact that I held his entire financial future firmly in my hands. For 5 years, I had kept that massive debt quietly suspended in a state of deliberate dormancy. I never charged him interest, and I never demanded a single payment. I held it as a silent insurance policy against his inherently selfish nature. Now, looking down at the pristine legal documents Elias had expertly prepared, I knew the dormant period was officially over. I picked up my favorite silver pen and tapped it thoughtfully against the thick stack of paper. "We are calling the entire debt due today," I announced calmly. Elias nodded, his expression completely serious. $150,000 payable immediately upon receipt of the formal notice. Because we purchased the original debts legally, we hold the absolute right to demand full payment without any prior warning. If he cannot produce the liquid funds within 48 hours, we have the legal authority to garnish his wages at the insurance firm. We can also place a hard lien on any remaining personal assets he foolishly believes he still owns. I signed my name flawlessly on the authorization line and pushed the red dossier back across the desk. "Send the formal electronic notice directly to his personal and professional email accounts," I instructed Elias. "Make sure the language is completely merciless. I want him to understand that there is no way to negotiate or escape this specific financial obligation. The walls must close in tight." Darius stumbled out of the commercial building and collapsed into the driver's seat of his leased SUV. He gripped the steering wheel, his chest heaving with exertion and terror. He had no wife to scream at. He had no punching bag left. The silent, empty vehicle offered no comfort, as his entire fake reality fractured. Suddenly, the sharp, cheerful chime of a high-priority email echoed through the car speakers. He reached for his phone with trembling, sweaty fingers. The subject line glowed brightly against the dark screen, reading, "Formal notice of immediate debt collection." Darius opened the email and his heart completely stopped beating. The document demanded $150,000 in 48 hours, threatening immediate asset seizure and wage garnishment. He was trapped in a financial nightmare from which there was no escape, and the game had barely even started. Darius slammed the heavy door of his leased Mercedes shut with enough force to shake the entire luxury vehicle. He marched across the sunlit concrete sidewalk and pushed aggressively through the revolving glass doors of the commercial office building. His mind was solely focused on crushing my newfound rebellion and restoring his carefully curated reality. He checked the digital directory mounted on the polished lobby wall. He saw a list of hundreds of random business names scrolling across the digital screen. None of them said Maya or anything related to accounting. He ignored the glaring discrepancy, blinded by his own toxic masculinity. Suite 400. That was the exact address I had provided on every tax document and emergency contact form for the past 5 years. He stepped into the waiting elevator and pressed the glowing fourth-floor button. He forcefully straightened his expensive silk tie while glaring at his angry reflection in the mirrored doors. He fully expected to find me sitting in a dreary, windowless cubicle surrounded by stacks of tedious paperwork. He planned to grab my arm, humiliate me loudly in front of my supposed coworkers, and force me to unlock his bank accounts right there on the spot. The elevator chimed pleasantly as the metallic doors slid open to reveal the fourth floor. Darius stormed out, entirely ready to unleash a vicious barrage of verbal abuse. He pushed open the frosted glass door, clearly marked with the suite number. Instead of a bustling accounting firm filled with busy employees and ringing telephones, he found himself standing in a tiny, sterile waiting room. A single receptionist sat behind a minimalist white desk, casually sorting through a large pile of manila envelopes. There were no clicking keyboards, no water coolers, and absolutely no signs of a thriving corporate environment. Darius marched directly up to the desk, slapping his palm flat against the pristine surface, knocking over a small acrylic pen holder in the process. The receptionist did not flinch. She simply stared at him with blank professional apathy. She had seen angry, confused people before. I am looking for my wife, he demanded, his voice thick with unbridled rage and entitlement. Her name is Maya. She has worked here as a freelance bookkeeper for 5 long years. Tell her Darius is here right now. He threatened to call building security if she did not produce his wife immediately. The receptionist blinked up at him, her expression completely devoid of recognition or fear. She politely set down a bundle of letters and shook her head. Sir, there is no one named Maya who works in this office. I am the only employee on this floor today. Darius felt a hot flash of extreme irritation wash over his face. Stop playing games with me, he snapped, leaning menacingly closer to the edge of the desk. This is her registered corporate address. I know for an absolute fact she works in Suite 400. The young woman sighed softly, gesturing toward a massive wall of metallic locked boxes located just behind her desk. Sir, this is not an accounting firm. This is a virtual mail forwarding facility. Independent contractors rent out these physical suite numbers solely to receive their business mail. No one actually works in these offices except for the mail sorting staff. Darius froze completely. The sheer magnitude of her simple explanation struck him like a heavy physical blow to the chest. Her calm explanation of the virtual mail facility shattered his delusions instantly. He stared blankly at the wall of metal mailboxes, his mind racing wildly to process the terrifying reality unfolding before him. For 5 entire years, he had blindly accepted my story about being a low-level freelance bookkeeper. He had never once bothered to drop by my office for lunch or surprise me with flowers because he fundamentally did not care about my career. He had deemed my work too boring and entirely beneath his high society standards. Now, standing in this empty, sterile room, a horrifying realization crept down his spine. He had absolutely zero idea what his wife actually did for a living. He had no idea where I spent my days, who I worked with, or where my steady stream of income was genuinely originating from. He stumbled backward, the arrogant fire in his chest rapidly cooling into genuine icy panic. He turned around without saying another word and practically ran back to the waiting elevator. His entire perception of our marriage was entirely fake. I was not the timid, predictable woman he thought he had completely under his thumb. I was an absolute stranger to him, operating in the shadows of his own house. While Darius was fleeing the virtual mailroom in a state of utter shock, I was sitting comfortably in my authentic corner office. My sprawling downtown penthouse suite offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire city skyline. The thick, soundproof glass shielded me from the chaotic noise of the busy streets far below. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water as my attorney Elias walked through the heavy wooden doors. He carried a thick red legal dossier tucked securely under his left arm. The next trap was fully prepared. Elias placed the red dossier directly onto my polished mahogany desk. He took a seat opposite me, a sharp, predatory smile playing on his lips. The school successfully kicked the boy off the premises, Elias reported, smoothly opening his notepad. Your husband's corporate card is bouncing all over town, and his luxury vehicle lease has been officially terminated. He is currently bleeding out in public, Maya. I nodded, opening the heavy cover of the red dossier. It was finally time to activate the most devastating weapon in my entire arsenal. To truly understand the depth of Darius's upcoming ruin, one had to look back at the very beginning of our relationship. Before we got married, Darius was drowning in a highly toxic sea of massive personal debt. The debts were deeply embarrassing. He owed $40,000 to a shady underground poker ring that operated out of a warehouse in downtown Atlanta. He owed another $60,000 on high-interest credit cards that he used exclusively to purchase fake designer suits, counterfeit luxury watches, and lavish vacations for his affluent fraternity brothers, just to maintain his facade of wealth. The remaining $50,000 was tied up in a fraudulent real estate investment scheme that he had foolishly funded without conducting any basic due diligence. He was a complete financial disaster, walking around in an expensive suit. I desperately wanted to be perceived as a wealthy, successful businessman, but he was actually bleeding cash at an alarming rate. By the time he proposed to me, his secret debts had ballooned to exactly $150,000. He was mere weeks away from a catastrophic personal bankruptcy that would have completely destroyed his fragile reputation in the city. I could not allow his toxic financial history to negatively impact my immaculate credit score once our assets became legally intertwined through marriage. So I took immediate decisive action. I utilized a discreet subsidiary debt purchasing agency that my primary holding company fully controlled. I anonymously purchased every single one of his outstanding debts for pennies on the dollar. When I swept in and purchased the debt through my subsidiary, the original creditors were thrilled to unload the toxic liability. I had effectively saved his life, his kneecaps, and his professional career at the insurance firm. I gathered all his messy liabilities into one single legally binding corporate portfolio. I essentially became his sole anonymous creditor without him ever realizing it. Darius honestly believed he had experienced a miraculous stroke of incredibly good luck. When the harassing phone calls from his previous creditors suddenly stopped, he assumed a clerical error had wiped his slate clean. He happily continued his arrogant, extravagant lifestyle, completely oblivious to the fact that I held his entire financial future firmly in my hands. I wiped his slate clean so we could build a life together, hoping he would change his reckless behavior once he felt secure. He never changed. He only grew more arrogant, assuming he was untouchable. Now that safety net was transforming into a steel cage. For 5 years, I had kept that massive debt quietly suspended in a state of deliberate dormancy. I never charged him interest, and I never demanded a single payment. I held it as a silent insurance policy against his inherently selfish nature. Now, looking down at the pristine legal documents Elias had expertly prepared, I knew the dormant period was officially over. I picked up my favorite silver pen and tapped it thoughtfully against the thick stack of paper. "We are calling the entire debt due today," I announced calmly to my attorney. Elias nodded, his expression completely serious and focused. $150,000 payable immediately upon receipt of the formal notice. Because we purchased the original debts legally, we hold the absolute right to demand full payment without any prior warning. If he cannot produce the liquid funds within 48 hours, we have the legal authority to garnish his wages at the insurance firm. We can also place a hard lien on any remaining personal assets he foolishly believes he still owns. I signed my name flawlessly on the authorization line and pushed the red dossier back across the desk. "Send the formal electronic notice directly to his personal and professional email accounts," I instructed Elias, maintaining my icy composure. "Make sure the legal language is completely merciless. I want him to understand that there is no way to negotiate or escape this specific financial obligation. The walls must close in tight around him." Darius stumbled out of the commercial office building and collapsed heavily into the driver's seat of his leased SUV. He gripped the leather steering wheel tightly, his chest heaving with extreme exertion and fresh terror. He had no wife to scream at. He had no punching bag left to absorb his mounting frustrations. The silent, empty vehicle offered absolutely no comfort, as his entire fake reality violently fractured around him. He realized he was completely defenseless against a woman he did not even know. Suddenly, the sharp, cheerful chime of a high-priority email echoed loudly through the car audio speakers. He reached for his mobile phone with trembling, sweaty fingers. The email was sent from Apex Financial Recovery, a subsidiary he had never heard of, but one that legally owned his soul. The subject line glowed brightly against the dark digital screen, reading "Formal Notice of Immediate Debt Collection." Darius opened the email and his heart completely stopped beating in his chest. He read the bold, capitalized letters demanding immediate action. The legal terminology was dense, precise, and utterly terrifying. It explicitly detailed the original sources of his debt: the underground poker games, the maxed-out luxury credit cards, confirming that they possessed his entire financial history. If the sum of $150,000 was not wired via certified funds, within 48 hours, Apex Financial Recovery would immediately contact his regional director at the insurance firm to initiate the maximum allowable wage garnishment under Georgia state law. They would also file liens against any bank accounts bearing his name. The document demanded exactly $150,000 in 48 hours, directly threatening immediate asset seizure and severe wage garnishment. I was completely trapped in a financial nightmare from which there was absolutely no escape, and the true game had barely even started today. The crushing weight of absolute financial ruin was closing in on Darius, and instead of taking accountability, he decided to drag me down into the mud with him. He was a man utterly obsessed with maintaining his flawless public image, and the thought of his Atlanta high society friends discovering his monumental failures terrified him more than the actual debt itself. He needed a scapegoat. He needed a victim narrative to desperately cling to. That same evening, my phone began vibrating continuously on the polished mahogany desk of my penthouse office. A notification from my secondary social media account flashed brightly across the screen. Several mutual acquaintances were urgently tagging me in a newly uploaded video. I opened the application and found a heavily edited, highly manipulative video posted directly to Darius's primary Facebook and Instagram pages. Darius was sitting on the expensive leather sofa in the living room of the mansion I owned. He looked deliberately disheveled. His tie was missing, his shirt collar was unbuttoned, and he was staring into the camera lens with wide, tear-filled eyes. He had perfectly manufactured the image of a broken, grieving husband. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this," Darius began, his voice shaking with practiced emotion. "As many of you know, my wife Maya and I have been navigating some incredibly difficult challenges recently. What you do not know is that Maya has been suffering from a severe, undiagnosed mental health crisis. Yesterday, she completely snapped. She drained all of our joint bank accounts, maxed out our credit cards, and abandoned our family without any warning. She literally walked out on me and my son Trey, leaving us completely destitute. She even canceled Trey's private school tuition, forcing him to be publicly humiliated and expelled. We are completely heartbroken and terrified for her safety, but she has blocked our numbers and refuses to seek the psychiatric help she so clearly needs. If anyone sees her, please approach her with extreme caution. She is not in her right mind." I watched the video twice, my expression remaining completely neutral. The sheer audacity of his lies was breathtaking. He had masterfully flipped the entire narrative, positioning himself as the deeply loving, victimized husband, while painting me as a ruthless, mentally unstable gold digger. He completely omitted the fact that I was the one who had funded his entire lifestyle for 5 years. He conveniently ignored the devastating $150,000 debt notice he had just received. Below the video, the comment section was already exploding with activity. Friends from his affluent country club circle, coworkers from his insurance firm, and distant family members were leaving hundreds of sympathetic messages. "Darius, I'm so incredibly sorry. We are praying for you and Trey. Stay strong, brother. This is absolutely horrific. I always thought she was too quiet. You never really know what kind of crazy someone is hiding. Let us know if you need anything, Darius. We can start a GoFundMe to help with Trey's school expenses. You are a great father." My phone continued to buzz relentlessly. Angry text messages from mutual acquaintances began flooding my inbox, demanding explanations and condemning my supposedly heartless behavior. I did not respond to a single one. I simply took a screenshot of the video and forwarded it directly to Elias with a brief note attached. Elias called me less than 2 minutes later. His voice was sharp with professional urgency. "Maya, I just saw the video. This is textbook defamation of character. He is publicly destroying your reputation to cover up his own financial crimes. Give me the authorization, and I will have a formal cease and desist order drafted and served to him within the hour. We can force him to take the video down immediately under the threat of a massive civil lawsuit." I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the city lights. "No," I replied calmly. "Do not send a cease and desist. Do not contact him at all." Elias paused, clearly surprised by my directive. "Maya, he is controlling the entire public narrative. He is turning your entire social circle against you. If you do not respond, people will assume his vicious lies are the truth." I smiled, taking a slow sip of my water. "Never interrupt your enemy when he is making a fatal mistake, Elias. Let him talk. Let him gather all the fake sympathy he wants. Let him build his entire defense on this specific recorded lie." When the absolute truth finally comes out, the whiplash will destroy his credibility so completely that he will never be able to show his face in this city again. Let them dig a massive, highly public grave. Elias chuckled softly on the other end of the line. You are playing a very dangerous long game, Maya. But I respect the strategy. We will hold our fire. The next few days were a masterclass in psychological warfare. I remained completely silent. I did not post any rebuttals on social media. I did not answer any angry phone calls from his misguided friends. I simply continued running my corporate empire from the safety of my secure penthouse. My total silence only seemed to embolden Darius and Dominique. They interpreted my lack of response as weakness, assuming I was too terrified or too embarrassed to defend myself against their public attacks. Empowered by the overwhelming wave of online sympathy, Darius and Dominique decided to double down on their fake narrative. They needed cash quickly to cover the massive debt collection notice, and they needed a spectacular distraction to keep their creditors at bay. Dominique's luxury salon and spa was rapidly approaching its 10-year anniversary. She had originally planned a modest celebration, but desperation fueled a sudden massive change in plans. Dominique posted a glamorous, highly produced announcement video on her business pages. She was sitting in one of her expensive salon chairs looking directly into the camera. Despite the heartbreaking family tragedy we are currently navigating, she announced, referring vaguely to my supposed mental breakdown, we refuse to let darkness win. My brother Darius and I are incredibly proud to announce the 10-year anniversary gala for my salon. This will be the premier social event of the season. We are inviting all of our loyal clients, local business leaders, and potential investors to join us for an evening of absolute luxury and celebration. We are stronger together, and we are looking forward to expanding our empire with the right partners. The strategy was incredibly transparent to anyone who actually knew the truth. Darius was using his sister's salon anniversary as a desperate fundraising event. He was going to use the gala to pitch a fake success story to a room full of wealthy Atlanta investors. He desperately needed angel investors to inject capital into the failing salon, hoping he could skim enough off the top to pay down the Apex financial recovery debt before the 48-hour deadline expired and his wages were aggressively garnished. I was essentially trying to run a sophisticated con game right out in the open, banking entirely on the fake sympathy he had generated from his defamatory video. The gala was scheduled to take place at the Grand Marquis Ballroom, one of the most exclusive and expensive venues in downtown Atlanta. I knew for a fact that Dominique did not have the liquid cash to secure that venue. She had undoubtedly maxed out her remaining business credit lines or convinced a vendor to front the costs based on her fake reputation. The arrogance required to throw a massive expensive party while drowning in debt was staggering. They were dancing on the very edge of a cliff, blindfolded by their own massive egos. I spent the rest of the week preparing for the gala. I did not receive an invitation, of course. Darius and Dominique firmly believed I was cowering in a cheap motel somewhere too ashamed to ever show my face in high society again. They assumed they had successfully neutralized the threat I posed. I reviewed the final kill shots with Elias. We compiled the formal eviction notice for Dominique's salon citing the severe breach of covenant and the newly tripled rent structure that she had completely failed to pay. We finalized the execution of the debt collection procedures for Darius, confirming that the 48-hour grace period would expire on the exact night of the gala. We also pulled the original prenuptial agreement from the corporate vault. Darius had signed it 5 years ago without ever bothering to read the fine print, blinded by his assumption that I was just a poor, eager woman desperate for his affection. The trap was fully set. The bait had been taken. The audience had been meticulously gathered by Darius himself. All that remained was for me to walk through the heavy double doors of the Grand Marquis Ballroom and deliver the final crushing blow. They wanted to play a highly public game of reputation destruction. I was going to show them exactly what true destruction looked like when backed by millions of dollars and ironclad legal documentation today. The days leading up to the 10-year anniversary gala were masterfully quiet on my end. I remained completely silent, while Darius and Dominique paraded their fabricated victim narrative across every social media platform in Atlanta. My phone constantly buzzed with angry notifications from mutual friends who had swallowed Darius and his tearful video without a single question. Former neighbors and casual acquaintances sent me vicious messages accusing me of abandoning my loving husband and leaving my poor stepson completely destitute. I did not delete the messages. I did not block their numbers. I simply let the digital venom pile up in my inbox. The sheer volume of their misguided outrage only proved how deeply they valued the superficial illusion Darius had constructed. They worshipped the false image of his wealth, and they were eager to punish the plain, quiet wife they believed had ruined it. I found a strange, quiet comfort in their absolute ignorance, because it validated every single precaution I had ever taken to protect myself. I knew that when the truth finally surfaced, the backlash against them would be utterly spectacular. They were setting themselves up for a magnificent public fall. I sat at the head of my polished mahogany boardroom table inside my downtown penthouse suite. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, casting long, sharp shadows across the spacious room. The city of Atlanta stretched out beneath me, a sprawling metropolis of bustling commerce and hidden empires. Somewhere out there, Dominique was likely barking orders at her salon staff, frantically preparing for a massive luxury event she could absolutely not afford. Somewhere else, Darius was probably begging a tailor to extend credit for his tuxedo rental. They were actively digging their own public graves, throwing a lavish party right on the edge of total financial collapse. The heavy wooden doors of the boardroom swung open, and Elias walked in carrying his signature red legal dossier. He took a seat to my right, looking exceptionally sharp in his dark navy suit. He placed the thick stack of documents directly onto the table, aligning the edges with meticulous precision. He did not smile today. We had officially reached the execution phase of our strategy, and Elias treated corporate destruction with the utmost professional reverence. "The trap is fully set," Maya Elias announced, his deep voice echoing slightly in the large room. "The 48-hour grace period on your husband and his massive debt collection notice expires exactly at 8 o'clock tonight. The precise moment he stands on that stage to welcome his wealthy guests and solicit new investors, his financial accounts will be entirely frozen by state mandate. His wages are scheduled for maximum garnishment starting Monday morning. There is no legal maneuver he can deploy to stop the process." I nodded slowly, picking up my silver pen. "And the commercial property?" Elias slid a formal document across the table. It was the commercial eviction notice for Dominique and her luxury salon. "She completely failed to remit the newly adjusted market rate rent," Elias explained. "She ignored the $30,000 back rent demand we issued. Instead of paying her legitimate corporate debts, she chose to sink her remaining credit into funding this extravagant anniversary gala. The legal eviction notice is fully processed and stamped by the city court. She has exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises and remove her equipment from your property. If she refuses, law enforcement will physically lock the doors and seize her assets to cover the outstanding balance. The city marshals are already briefed and standing by to execute the order the very moment the deadline officially expires." I traced the raised seal on the eviction notice. Dominique had spent years treating me like an uneducated peasant. She had mocked my thrift store sweaters while I was secretly subsidizing the very walls that housed her precious business. Tonight she was going to learn the staggering difference between pretending to be a wealthy entrepreneur and actually owning the commercial real estate she stood on. "What about the marital asset division?" I asked, turning my attention to the final and most critical document in the red dossier. "Darius has undoubtedly convinced himself that he can legally claim half of my corporate empire once he realizes how much money I actually possess. He is exactly the type of man who will try to use the divorce courts to save himself from bankruptcy." Elias pulled a pristine, crisp document from the very bottom of the stack. It was our prenuptial agreement. Looking at the 5-year-old signature on the final page instantly transported me back to the week before our wedding. I vividly remembered sitting in a brightly lit attorney office alongside Darius. At the time, he was arrogant, boastful, and completely blinded by his own massive ego. He truly believed he was protecting his regional director's salary from a broke freelance bookkeeper. He had slouched carelessly in his leather chair, checking his fake designer watch, while the mediator tried to explain the legal terminology. Do we really need to read through all this boring legal jargon? Darius had complained, waving his hand dismissively at the mediator. Maya has a few $100s in her checking account and drives a used hybrid car. I am the one bringing the real earning power into this marriage. Just show me where to sign so I can protect my future assets. I have big executive promotions coming my way, and I need to make sure my hard-earned money stays in my own pocket if things go south. I had sat quietly beside him, hands folded neatly in my lap, wearing a cheap floral dress I had bought specifically for the occasion. The mediator had strongly advised Darius to hire his own independent legal counsel to review the stipulations. Darius had laughed loudly, claiming he was smart enough to understand a basic contract and did not want to waste money on unnecessary legal fees. He was so eager to protect his imaginary future wealth that he completely ignored the specific phrasing I had carefully instructed Elias to include. Darius had eagerly signed a waiver stating that in the event of a divorce, all pre-existing and future debts would remain the sole responsibility of the original debtor. More importantly, he signed a legally binding clause stipulating that any limited liability companies, corporate holdings, or intellectual property acquired before or during the marriage were completely shielded from marital asset division. He had enthusiastically legally isolated himself from my entire empire, assuming he was the only one bringing any real value to the table. He had effectively guaranteed his own future destitution because he simply could not fathom the idea that a plain, quiet woman could be financially superior to him. Elias tapped the signature page of the prenuptial agreement, bringing my focus back to the present moment inside the sunny boardroom. I waived all rights to your corporate holdings, Maya Elias confirmed smoothly. He also legally bound himself to that $150,000 toxic debt we just called due. It is a completely inescapable financial snare that will hunt him forever. When you hand him the divorce papers tonight, he walks away with absolutely nothing except the clothes on his back and a massive financial judgment he can never hope to repay. His son Trey will no longer have access to the trust fund for his elite private academy. His sister Dominique will lose her entire luxury salon business by tomorrow afternoon. They are walking blindly into a total massacre. I closed the red legal dossier and rested my hands flat against the cool mahogany table. The time for playing the submissive invisible wife was officially over. For 5 years, I had allowed them to project their profound insecurities and deep-rooted self-hatred onto me. I had absorbed their cruel jokes, their petty insults, and their endless financial demands. I had given them every possible opportunity to show even a sliver of genuine humility or kindness. They had chosen arrogance at every single turn. Now the overwhelming consequences of those choices were finally arriving at their doorstep. I stood up from the conference table. "Thank you, Elias," I said calmly. "I will take the documents from here." Elias handed me the thick manila envelope containing the foreclosure records, the commercial eviction notice, and the signed prenuptial agreement. "Happy hunting, Maya," he said with a respectful nod. I left the boardroom and walked down the long hallway to my private master suite within the penthouse. I stepped into my expansive walk-in closet. I reached down and unbuttoned the cheap faded denim jeans I had worn like a costume for half a decade. I took off the oversized, unremarkable neutral sweater. I let the garments fall to the hardwood floor, shedding the fake persona I had carefully maintained. I walked over to the section of the closet I had kept hidden behind locked doors. I pulled out a custom-tailored designer power suit in a striking shade of midnight blue. The fabric was immaculate, structured to convey absolute authority and undeniable wealth. I slipped into the matching trousers and fastened the sharp, elegant blazer. I applied a bold, dark red lipstick, tying my hair back into a sleek, severe style that left my face completely exposed. Finally, I reached for a pair of towering black leather pumps, featuring distinctive crimson soles. I slipped them onto my feet, feeling my entire posture shift. I was no longer the mousy bookkeeper. I was the chief executive officer. I picked up the heavy manila envelope and walked out of the penthouse. I rode the private elevator down to the ground floor lobby. Through the large glass doors, I saw a pristine jet-black chauffeur-driven Rolls-Royce pull up to the curb. The uniformed driver stepped out quickly and opened the heavy rear door for me. I stepped out into the cool evening air. The city was glowing with streetlights and bustling traffic. I slid gracefully into the luxurious back seat of the vehicle, placing the stack of destructive legal documents resting carefully on my lap. The driver closed the door firmly and got behind the steering wheel. He looked at me through the rearview mirror, waiting for my command. "Take me to the gala," I instructed him, my voice completely steady and cold. "It is time to crash a party." The smooth glide of the Rolls-Royce through the vibrant downtown Atlanta streets felt entirely different tonight. I watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows, my reflection staring back at me in the glass. For 5 years I had navigated these exact same streets, feeling invisible intentionally, suppressing my own immense power to comfort a man whose entire existence was a carefully constructed lie. Tonight I was no longer hiding in the shadows of his massive, fragile ego. The heavy manila envelope resting on my lap contained the absolute destruction of Darius and his highly arrogant sister Dominique. I ran my fingers over the smooth paper, feeling the incredible weight of the foreclosure documents, the commercial eviction notices, and the prenuptial agreement. Every single page was a testament to my extreme patience and their overwhelming blind greed. I was about to execute a flawless financial checkmate against the people who had treated me like disposable garbage, and I felt a profound sense of inner calm washing over my entire body. I had given them every chance to be decent human beings, and they had chosen cruelty at every single turn. Now they were going to face the brutal consequences of those terrible choices. The Grand Marquis Ballroom was universally considered a crown jewel of Atlanta high society. It was a massive historic venue, known for hosting elite corporate galas, high-profile charity auctions, and extravagant celebrity weddings. The daily rental fee alone was staggering. As my driver pulled up to the grand entrance, I noted the sheer audacity of Dominique leasing this specific space. Valets in crisp professional uniforms were rushing frantically to park expensive luxury cars. Guests dressed in high-end evening gowns and custom-tailored tuxedos mingled effortlessly near the grand stone columns. Dominique was completely bankrupt, drowning in commercial debt, yet she had somehow convinced naive vendors to front the exorbitant cost of an event designed solely to scam angel investors. The chauffeur parked the sleek vehicle, stepped out quickly, and opened my door. I stepped out into the humid Georgia evening, my crimson-soled heels hitting the pavement with a sharp, authoritative click. I adjusted my designer blazer, ensuring every line of my midnight blue suit was impeccably straight, and walked confidently toward the main entrance. The luxurious lobby was completely deserted, as the main presentation had already begun inside the primary ballroom. I walked smoothly past the empty coat check counter and approached the massive, beautifully carved oak double doors. I could hear the muffled sound of a microphone echoing loudly from inside the venue. I signaled for the two event staff members standing guard by the doors to step aside. They took one look at my designer power suit, my flawless posture, and instantly recognized unquestionable authority. They backed away respectfully without asking a single question. I placed my hands flat against the heavy wooden doors and pushed them open with steady, deliberate force. The scene inside the ballroom was breathtakingly lavish. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over dozens of round tables draped in expensive white silk. The room was packed tightly with the most affluent members of the local business community, all sipping premium champagne and giving their undivided attention to the brightly lit stage. And there, standing directly in the center of the elevated platform, was Darius. He was wearing a classic black tuxedo, though I immediately noticed the slight bunching at the shoulders that indicated it was a cheap last-minute rental. He was holding a microphone projecting the ultimate image of a resilient, highly successful corporate titan. Dominique stood slightly behind him wearing a glittering sequined gown, playing the role of the visionary entrepreneur to absolute perfection. They looked like the ultimate power sibling duo, selling a massive lie to a room full of open checkbooks. As many of you know, Darius was saying, his voice thick with heavily manufactured emotion, my family has faced some deeply tragic personal challenges this week. We have had to navigate the heartbreaking reality of severe mental illness, striking someone very close to us. It has been a devastating blow to our entire household, testing our faith and our strength in ways I never thought possible. The crowd murmured in quiet, polite sympathy. Women touched their chests. Men nodded solemnly. I had to physically bite my tongue to keep from laughing out loud at his sheer, unadulterated nerve. He was actively milking my supposed mental breakdown for every single ounce of investor pity he could possibly gather. He was using his own fabricated smear campaign as a fundraising tool. But we absolutely refuse to let darkness win tonight. Darius continued sweeping his free hand toward the crowd with practiced magnetic charisma. We build. We overcome. My sister Dominique has spent 10 grueling years building a premier luxury salon empire in this beautiful city. Tonight we are offering a select few of you the highly exclusive opportunity to invest in our massive Phase 2 expansion. We are talking about doubling our square footage, expanding our high-end services, and securing our legacy in the downtown commercial district for decades to come. I stepped fully into the ballroom. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me with a loud, resounding thud that echoed like a gunshot across the cavernous room. The sound immediately drew the attention of the wealthy guests seated at the back tables. They turned in their chairs, their polite, sympathetic smiles instantly vanishing. The frantic whispers began immediately. As I walked slowly down the center aisle, the ripple effect of my presence moved swiftly through the crowd. People nudged their tablemates aggressively. The quiet murmurs swelled into a massive wave of confused, urgent whispering. The string quartet playing softly in the corner faltered, a cellist hitting a sharp wrong note before the elegant music died out completely. Total dead silence fell over the Grand Marquis ballroom. Hundreds of eyes were locked intensely onto me. The guests who had watched Darius and his manipulative social media video expected to see a broken, disheveled, mentally unstable woman stumbling into the room. Instead, they saw a completely unrecognizable corporate powerhouse. My posture was absolutely flawless. My tailored midnight blue suit commanded immediate respect from everyone present. My dark red lipstick and sleekly pulled back hair projected fierce, unrelenting authority. I walked with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a woman who owned the very air circulating in the room. I did not break eye contact with the stage for a single second. Darius froze mid-sentence. The charming, practiced smile literally slid off his face, instantly replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. He gripped the microphone so tightly, his knuckles turned completely white under the stage lights. Dominique took a panicked, clumsy step backward, her glittering gown catching the light as she desperately looked around the stage for a hidden escape route. They were staring at a ghost who had suddenly transformed into an unstoppable titan. Darius quickly realized his entire fake victim narrative was rapidly collapsing in front of his wealthy prospective investors. His visible panic instantly morphed into aggressive defensive rage. He needed to maintain his alpha male facade at all costs before the investors started asking dangerous questions about his credibility. Security. Darius barked into the microphone, his voice sharp and incredibly aggressive, entirely shattering the elegant atmosphere of the expensive gala. Security, get in here right now. My wife is deeply unwell. She is not supposed to be here. She is trespassing on a private corporate event. Escort her out of this building immediately before she hurts someone tonight. Two large, intimidating security guards wearing dark suits immediately stepped out from the shadows near the edge of the stage. They moved quickly down the center aisle, heading straight toward me, with their hands raised in a defensive posture. The wealthy guests in the surrounding chairs pulled away, clutching their expensive champagne flutes, bracing for a messy, embarrassing physical altercation to unfold. I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still in the middle of the crowded ballroom, clutching the thick manila envelope tightly in my left hand. I did not show a single ounce of fear or hesitation. I stared directly at the approaching guards, my expression radiating absolute icy dominance. The head of security, a tall, broad-shouldered man, wearing a coiled clear earpiece, reached out his large hand to physically grab my arm. "Sir," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying enough commanding authority to make him hesitate mid-stride. I strongly suggest you listen very carefully to the radio transmission coming through your earpiece right now before you make the biggest career mistake of your entire life." The security guard stopped dead in his tracks. He pressed two fingers heavily against his earpiece, his brow furrowing in deep, profound confusion. He listened intently for exactly 3 seconds. I watched the color rapidly drain entirely from his face. His eyes widened in profound shock as the voice on the other end of his radio delivered a frantic, urgent directive. He instantly lowered his hands. He took two large, quick steps backward, creating a wide berth of highly respectful distance between us. He turned to his partner and gave a sharp, definitive shake of his head. The second guard backed away immediately. They completely refused to touch me. Darius stood on the stage, watching his entire security defense instantly evaporate into thin air. His chest was heaving with extreme exertion and pure panic. "What are you doing?" Darius screamed into the microphone, losing every last shred of his carefully crafted composure. "I am paying you to secure this private event. Grab her and throw her out onto the street right now. She is a mentally unstable trespasser trying to ruin my sister and her business." From the side of the stage, the general manager of the Grand Marquis Ballroom walked out from behind the heavy velvet curtains. He was a distinguished older man who personally managed the most elite properties in the entire city. He walked swiftly and purposefully directly up to Darius. He did not look angry. He looked absolutely terrified. He stepped up to the podium, placing his hand firmly over the microphone stand. The entire room watched in stunned, breathless anticipation. The venue manager leaned closely into the microphone, completely ignoring Darius and his frantic, ridiculous demands. His voice amplified loudly across the silent, captivated ballroom, reaching every single wealthy investor sitting in the expansive audience tonight. "Sir," the venue manager announced with trembling, absolute clarity, "we cannot remove the owner of the building." The collective gasp that erupted from the wealthy crowd was deafening. The words hung in the humid air of the Grand Marquis Ballroom, vibrating through the massive speakers and completely paralyzing everyone on the elevated stage. Darius stared at the venue manager with wide, unblinking eyes, his jaw practically unhinged. He slowly turned his head to look at me, his face completely drained of color. Dominique gripped the edge of the wooden podium, her acrylic nails digging into the polished wood as if she were desperately trying to keep herself from collapsing. I did not wait for either of them to recover from the initial shockwave. I walked gracefully up the velvet-lined stairs to the main stage. My crimson-soled heels clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floorboards, each step sounding like the ticking of a countdown clock. I stopped directly in front of Darius. He was breathing heavily, sweat beading on his forehead under the bright stage lighting. He looked absolutely pathetic in his rented tuxedo. I reached out and firmly took the microphone from his trembling hand. He let it go without a single ounce of resistance, his fingers completely limp. I turned to face the vast sea of affluent investors, high society socialites, and local business leaders. They were entirely captivated, their champagne flutes suspended halfway to their mouths. "Good evening, everyone," I announced. My voice was calm, melodic, and projected absolute authority. "My name is Maya. Darius has spent the last week broadcasting a highly dramatic, entirely fabricated narrative regarding my mental health and our marital finances. He invited all of you here tonight to solicit investments for a massive commercial salon expansion. He desperately needs your money because as of this morning, he has absolutely nothing left of his own." Darius finally found his voice, stepping forward with his hands raised defensively. "Maya, stop this right now," he pleaded, his voice cracking horribly. "Do not do this in front of these people. We can talk about this at home." "We do not have a home, Darius," I replied smoothly, not even turning my head to look at him. "I own a home and you currently reside in it as an unauthorized guest." I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored designer blazer and pulled out a sleek, ultra-thin tablet. I walked over to the audiovisual technician standing frozen at the side of the stage. I handed him a connector cable. "Put my screen on the main projector," I instructed him quietly. He obeyed, instantly recognizing exactly who held the real power in the room. The massive digital screen behind the podium flickered to life, bathing the entire stage in a bright, crisp white light. A collective murmur rippled through the audience as the first document appeared in massive, undeniable high definition. It was the official property deed for the sprawling six-bedroom suburban mansion Darius loved to brag about at his country club. "Let us begin with the primary residence," I told the crowd, gesturing toward the giant screen. For 5 years, Darius has hosted lavish dinner parties in this magnificent estate, claiming he purchased it with a massive executive bonus. As you can clearly see on the verified property deed, the mansion is owned entirely by Apex Real Estate Holdings. That specific limited liability company is solely registered to me. I purchased the estate entirely in before we were even married. Darius has never paid a single mortgage payment, property tax bill, or maintenance fee. He is essentially a squatter who has been living rent-free on my personal property. The audience erupted into loud, shocked whispers. I saw several prominent angel investors actively pulling their checkbooks out of their suit jackets and sliding them back into their pockets. Darius looked as though he might physically vomit. He backed away from the screen, shaking his head in rapid, panicked denial. "But we share that house," Darius stammered weakly, his voice barely carrying over the murmuring crowd. "You are my wife. What is yours is mine. We will get to the legal reality of our marriage in just a moment, Darius," I said coldly. I tapped the screen of my tablet. Boom! The projector instantly shifted to a new document. The crowd leaned forward collectively. It was the official vehicle title and lease agreement for the luxury Mercedes vehicle Darius proudly drove around the city. "Next, we have the luxury transportation," I continued, my voice echoing powerfully across the silent ballroom. "Many of you have complimented Darius on his beautiful sports utility vehicle. You likely assumed it was a testament to his corporate success at the insurance firm. In reality, the vehicle is leased directly under a corporate account tied to my primary holding fund. I subsidized his daily transportation just to keep him satisfied. However, due to his recent aggressive behavior, I officially revoked his driving privileges this morning. The dealership has already initiated the repossession process. If any of you rode here with him tonight, I strongly suggest you arrange for an alternative ride home." Laughter rippled through the back of the room. It was not polite laughter. It was mocking, cruel, and incredibly dismissive. The wealthy elite of Atlanta were absolutely ruthless when they smelled fake money, and Darius had just been exposed as the biggest fraud in the entire city. Dominique finally snapped out of her paralyzed state. She marched forward, her sequined gown sparkling aggressively under the bright lights. "You are an absolute monster," Dominique screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You are trying to destroy my brother because you are a bitter, jealous woman. You think showing off some boring financial paperwork makes you powerful? You are ruining my 10-year anniversary celebration. This night is supposed to be about my business empire. I am a self-made woman, and you are just a spiteful, lonely accountant." I slowly turned my entire body to face her. I looked at her with an expression of profound, chilling emptiness. "Dominique," I said softly, "did you honestly believe I came here tonight just to expose your brother?" I tapped the tablet screen one final time. Boom! The largest document yet appeared on the main projector. It was a highly detailed commercial lease agreement, complete with highlighted addendums and red corporate stamps. The entire room went completely dead silent again. The investors who had been considering funding Dominique and her salon expansion stared at the screen in absolute horror. "Let us talk about your booming business empire," Dominique Y announced, ensuring my voice carried to the very back row of the massive venue. "3 years ago, your luxury salon was on the brink of total bankruptcy. You could not afford to pay your rent, your suppliers, or your staff. You were mere days away from being locked out of your commercial space entirely. You thought a mysterious anonymous benefactor stepped in to subsidize your lease and save your business. You thought your sheer talent had inspired an angel investor to keep your doors open." Dominique stared at the screen, her eyes tracing the familiar legal layout of her commercial lease, her face contorted in utter confusion. "What does this have to do with you?" she demanded, though her voice was trembling violently now. "I am the anonymous benefactor, Dominique," I stated, dropping the final crushing truth onto the stage. "I own the commercial high-rise building where your salon is located. I have been paying your rent for 36 consecutive months. I funded your entire self-proclaimed girl boss persona because your brother begged me to save you from complete financial ruin. But as you can clearly see in Section 4 of your lease agreement, the anonymous subsidy can be revoked instantly at the complete discretion of the property owner. Dominique let out a strangled gasp, bringing her hands up to cover her mouth. When you stood in my home yesterday and insulted me, I revoked that subsidy permanently. I explained methodically. Your rent instantly reverted to the current market rate, and you were immediately charged for the past due balance. You owe my holding company exactly $30,000 in back rent. Instead of paying your legitimate corporate debts, you chose to lease this incredibly expensive ballroom to run a scam on these wealthy investors tonight. I disconnected the tablet from the projector cable and handed it back to the terrified technician. I walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at the crowd. These two individuals have absolutely nothing to offer you, I told the investors. They are drowning in toxic debt, operating on stolen time, and selling you a completely fraudulent narrative. Keep your money in your pockets tonight. I turned back around and walked directly up to Dominique. She was physically shaking, tears of ruined pride welling up in her eyes. I reached into my tailored blazer and pulled out the thick manila envelope I had been carrying. I pressed it firmly against her chest, forcing her to take it. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice completely broken. "Your eviction notice," I replied softly, my words slicing through the last remaining shreds of her fake empire. "You have 24 hours to clear your equipment off my property." The Grand Marquis Ballroom had descended into an absolute chaotic frenzy of highly destructive whispering. The sheer terrifying magnitude of my public declarations had completely shattered the elegant, sophisticated atmosphere of the expensive gala. The extremely wealthy investors, who had been actively wooing Darius and Dominique just moments ago, were now openly distancing themselves from the stage. Some were urgently whispering into their cellular phones, clearly ordering their personal financial teams to sever all existing ties with my husband. Others were simply standing up, collecting their expensive coats, and walking directly toward the large oak exit doors without bothering to say a single word of goodbye. They were fleeing the scene of a massive, undeniable financial massacre. Darius watched his entire fake empire crumble into dust right before his very eyes. The investors were leaving. The money was officially gone. The carefully constructed illusion he had spent 5 long years aggressively maintaining was completely exposed as a pathetic, hollow fraud. His visible panic instantly morphed back into a violent, desperate rage. He lunged aggressively toward me, attempting to physically grab the microphone back from my steady hand. "You cannot do this to me, Maya!" Darius screamed, his voice raw, unhinged, and echoing terribly across the emptying ballroom. "You are my wife. We are legally married. Under the laws of this state, I am fully entitled to exactly half of your corporate empire. You cannot just lock me out of my own life. I will take you to court. I will absolutely destroy you in the divorce settlement. I will take 50% of everything you own." I was practically hyperventilating, completely consumed by his own toxic greed. He truly believed his marital status was an impenetrable shield that would ultimately protect him from his own massive financial failures. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I simply stared at him with profound, chilling emptiness, waiting for the final brutal trap to completely spring shut. Right on cue, Elias stepped smoothly from the dark shadows at the edge of the elevated stage. He walked purposefully toward us, looking exceptionally sharp and dangerous in his dark navy suit. He did not carry a microphone, but his commanding presence immediately silenced the remaining stragglers in the audience. He held a thick, pristine legal folder in his left hand. "Actually, Darius," Elias announced smoothly, his voice carrying incredible professional weight and absolute authority. "You are not legally entitled to a single solitary penny of Maya's corporate empire." Elias stopped directly between Darius and me. He opened the legal folder and pulled out a crisp, undeniable document. He held it up for Darius to clearly see, making sure the raised legal seals were completely visible under the bright stage lights. It was our signed prenuptial agreement. Darius stared blankly at the document, his frantic brain struggling to process the legal terminology. "What is that?" he demanded, though his voice was noticeably trembling now. That is just the standard prenup we signed before the wedding. It means absolutely nothing. Maya was completely broke when she signed it. I am the one who brought the real earning power into this marriage. Elias offered a slow, predatory smile that was absolutely chilling to witness. That is exactly what you confidently assumed 5 years ago. Darius Elias explained methodically, ensuring every single word sliced deeply into Darius's fragile ego. You were so incredibly arrogant, so completely blinded by your own toxic superiority complex, that you enthusiastically signed this specific legal waiver without even bothering to read the fine print. You explicitly insisted on protecting your own imaginary future wealth from a woman you assumed was entirely beneath your high society standards. Elias tapped the signature page of the prenuptial agreement with his silver pen. In Section 7 of this legally binding document, Elias continued, his voice echoing loudly. You explicitly signed a waiver stating that in the event of a divorce, all pre-existing and future debts remain the sole responsibility of the original debtor. Furthermore, you legally bound yourself to a clause stipulating that any limited liability company's corporate holdings or intellectual property acquired before or during the marriage are completely shielded from any marital asset division. You aggressively and legally isolated yourself from Maya's entire multi-million-dollar empire because you simply could not fathom the idea that a quiet, unassuming woman could be financially superior to you. The remaining audience members gasped collectively. The sheer poetic irony of Darius's own staggering arrogance sealing his ultimate doom was not lost on anyone in the room. Darius stumbled backward, clutching his chest as if he were experiencing a massive heart attack. No, he gasped weakly, shaking his head in rapid, panicked denial. No, that cannot be right. I did not agree to that. You tricked me. You deliberately set me up. Elias smoothly pulled a second set of documents from the legal folder. He held them out toward Darius. And these, Elias announced, dropping the final crushing blow, are the official divorce papers formally served to you tonight. Alongside them is the finalized collection mandate for your pre-existing highly toxic $150,000 personal debt. The 48-hour grace period expired exactly 12 minutes ago. You are currently in total catastrophic default. Your wages will be garnished starting Monday morning, and your remaining personal bank accounts are being legally seized as we speak. Darius stared at the divorce papers in Elias's outstretched hand. He did not reach out to take them. He was completely, utterly paralyzed by the staggering magnitude of his own absolute destruction. He had lost his fake luxury house. He had lost his leased sports car. He was losing his marriage. And he was now legally bound to a massive, inescapable debt that would haunt him for the rest of his miserable life. From the back of the crowded ballroom, a loud, angry voice suddenly cut through the heavy silence. You lied to me, Dad. The entire crowd turned to look at the back entrance. Trey was standing there, still wearing his wrinkled private school blazer. He had clearly rushed to the gala after being humiliated and expelled from the Oakbridge Private Academy. His face was twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated teenage rage. Trey stormed down the center aisle, completely ignoring the whispering investors. He stopped at the foot of the stage, glaring up at his father with absolute disgust. You told me we were rich, Trey yelled, his voice cracking horribly. You told me Maya was just a useless, broke bookkeeper. I got kicked out of school today because my tuition check bounced. My friends laughed at me. I was escorted off the property by security guards. You are a complete pathetic fraud. Darius looked down at his furious son, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Trey, please, Darius pleaded weakly, reaching a trembling hand out toward the boy. I can fix this. I just need a little bit more time. Fix what? Trey screamed back. You have absolutely nothing. You ruined my entire life because you are too stupid to even read a legal contract. I am completely done with you. Trey turned his back on his father, aggressively shoving past a stunned, wealthy investor, and stormed out of the Grand Marquis ballroom. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind him, leaving a profound, hollow echo in his wake. Darius watched his son walk away, his entire world completely shattering into a million tiny, unrecoverable pieces. The carefully constructed illusion of his wealth, his power, and his untouchable status was permanently destroyed. He was entirely exposed as a broke, desperate, heavily indebted fraud who had alienated everyone who had ever truly cared for him. His knees buckled. Darius collapsed heavily onto the hard wooden stage, the rented tuxedo pants bunching awkwardly around his legs. He looked up at me, tears streaming rapidly down his face, completely abandoning the last remaining shreds of his pride. "Maya, please!" Darius begged, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Please do not do this to me. I have absolutely nothing left. I will change. I will be a better husband. I will do whatever you want. Please just give me a second chance to make things right." I stood over him, my posture immaculate in my tailored designer power suit, my crimson-soled heels planted firmly on the stage. I looked down at the man who had mocked me, insulted me, and treated me like disposable garbage for 5 long years. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no remorse. I felt only the cold, satisfying clarity of absolute, undeniable justice. I looked at his tear-stained face, my expression completely ice-cold and fiercely unforgiving. "You should have learned how to ask for permission before you decided to play games with my money, Darius," I said softly, my voice carrying incredible lethal weight. "The allowance is permanently tapped out." I turned my back on his pathetic sobbing. I did not look at the trembling, ruined Dominique. I did not look at the stunned, silent investors remaining in the room. I simply walked gracefully down the velvet-lined stairs, my crimson-soled heels clicking sharply against the polished floor, and walked purposefully out of the Grand Marquis Ballroom, leaving them all behind in the beautiful ashes of their own miserable arrogance. 6 months have passed since the Grand Marquis Ballroom became the graveyard for my husband and his towering arrogance. I stand at the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my downtown Atlanta high-rise office, looking out over the sunlit city's skyline. Morning traffic crawls along the busy interstate below a river of gleaming metal and brake lights. From this vantage point, the city feels serene. I take a slow, deliberate sip from my porcelain cup, savoring the profound silence of my corporate fortress. The massive fallout from the anniversary gala has settled into a highly satisfying reality. When I walked out of that venue, leaving Darius begging on his knees in a rented tuxedo, I did not look back. I ignored his frantic apologies in the weeks that followed. Elias handled the divorce proceedings with ruthless precision. The judge finalized the dissolution of our marriage in record time, validating the ironclad prenuptial agreement Darius had foolishly signed. I walked away with my entire empire untouched. Darius left with nothing but the clothes on his back and an inescapable mountain of toxic debt. His financial ruin was swift, brutal, and incredibly public. The wealthy elite of Atlanta high society turned their backs on him the exact moment my projector illuminated his fraudulent existence. Without my corporate black card or the luxury lease, his carefully curated illusion of immense wealth evaporated overnight. Today, my former husband works a grueling, deeply humiliating mid-level retail job at a discount menswear store in a declining suburban shopping mall. He spends exhausting days measuring inseams and organizing clearance racks for men who treat him with the same casual disrespect he once eagerly directed at me. Because Elias executed the formal debt collection mandate for the $150,000 liability, Darius is subjected to maximum wage garnishment under Georgia state law. A massive percentage of his meager paycheck is automatically seized and transferred directly into the accounts of my subsidiary recovery agency. He is practically working for me for free, trapped in a vicious cycle of minimum wage servitude to pay off the gambling debts he tried to hide. He currently rents a cramped studio apartment miles away from the gated communities he once proudly ruled. The harsh reality of this impoverished lifestyle hit his son Trey just as violently. Without the anonymous trust fund to cover his exorbitant private school tuition, Trey was permanently expelled from the prestigious Oakbridge Academy. His wealthy friends, the ones he used to text while ignoring his economics teacher, blocked his number and completely erased him from their elite social circles. Today, Trey attends a massively overcrowded local public high school. The luxury designer blazers and expensive athletic gear are entirely gone. he is forced to navigate the harsh realities of an unprivileged teenage existence. To afford basic expenses, Trey now works a greasy, exhausting part-time job manning the deep fryer at a local fast food franchise. He spends weekends smelling of old cooking oil, scrubbing floors, and saving his meager hourly wages just to buy his own basic sneakers. The intense and earned entitlement he once displayed in my home has been completely beaten out of him by the grueling demands of minimum wage labor. He no longer laughs at anyone over a $7 pastry. He now knows exactly how many hours of burning his hands on a hot fry basket it takes to earn that money. And there is Dominique. The self-proclaimed girl boss of Atlanta was forcefully evicted exactly 24 hours after the gala. When the city marshals arrived to lock the glass doors of her salon, they seized all of her expensive styling chairs, premium hair products, and high-end spa equipment to cover the $30,000 in back rent she owed my holding company. Her fraudulent business empire was completely liquidated in hours. Without the anonymous, deeply subsidized lease I had generously provided for 3 years, Dominique was exposed as a terrible businesswoman who could not even afford basic overhead costs. Her wealthy clientele abandoned her, immediately flocking to other salons. Today, the former queen of Atlanta high society is sweeping up hair clippings and washing dirty towels in a cheap budget strip mall salon on the outskirts of the city. She styles hair for discount prices while taking orders from a manager who berates her. The massive diamond watch she used to flaunt is gone, likely pawned to pay for her basic living expenses. She has entirely lost her platform, her stolen wealth, and her loud, aggressive voice. I turn away from the expansive glass windows of my penthouse office and walk back toward my polished mahogany desk. The morning sun catches the reflection of my silver pen, resting exactly where I left it. I sit in my plush leather executive chair feeling absolute unshakable security. I press a button on my desk console. My assistant walks in carrying a small white porcelain plate. She sets it gently on the desk and quietly exits the room, closing the heavy doors behind her. Resting on the plate is an exquisite custom-made slice of decadent red velvet cake. The dark crimson sponge is perfectly layered with rich, flawless cream cheese frosting. It was baked exclusively for me by a premier pastry chef. I pick up a heavy silver fork and cut a small, perfect piece from the center of the slice. I bring it to my mouth and take a deliberate bite. The taste is incredibly sweet, rich, and utterly triumphant. I smile, looking back out at the vast city skyline stretching endlessly before me. I have finally learned the most valuable lesson of my entire life. True power is never about being the loudest person in the room. True power is not about flashy cars, designer clothes, or screaming insults to elevate a fragile ego. True power is simply about quietly holding all the right cards in your hand and knowing exactly when to play them.